The oppressive scent of lilies still clung to every surface, a cloying, unwelcome perfume that had replaced the comforting aroma of John's pipe tobacco in my baking. It had been just hours since we'd laid my beloved John to rest under a sky that wept almost as profusely as I had. The funeral, a blur of solemn faces and murmured condolences, was over, but the crushing weight of grief remained, a physical ache in the hollow space where his laughter used to resonate. I stood in our living room, the heart of the home we had meticulously built together over 40 years, a sanctuary filled with the echoes of shared dreams, whispered secrets, and the comfortable rhythm of two lives intertwined. Each piece of furniture, every framed photograph on the mantelpiece was a silent testament to our enduring love, now cruelly interrupted by the relentless march of time. I was meticulously arranging a vase of John's favorite crimson roses, their velvety petals a vibrant splash against the somber quiet. It was a small act, a desperate attempt to grasp onto something familiar, something beautiful amidst the raw, unyielding agony of loss. My fingers, usually steady and capable, trembled slightly as I trimmed a stem, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek, leaving a cool trail on my skin. This house, our sanctuary, was all I had left of him. Every corner held a memory, every creak of the floorboards a whisper of his presence. I sought solace in a quiet ritual, hoping to anchor myself in the swirling vortex of sorrow that threatened to pull me under. The fragile peace, however, was brutally shattered by the jarring squeal of the front door hinges, followed by an aggressive, almost impatient creak as it swung open. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air in the room seemed to thicken, growing cold and heavy before she even stepped fully inside. There stood Cynthia, my daughter-in-law, a woman whose beauty was undeniable, yet whose smile had always felt a little too thin, her perfectly made-up eyes a little too calculating, devoid of genuine warmth. She was impeccably dressed, as always, her designer coat still on, as if she were merely passing through, a fleeting presence in my enduring tragedy. But the way she held herself, the subtle tension in her shoulders, spoke of a different agenda. She didn't offer a word of comfort, no soft, "Martha, I'm so sorry," no gentle embrace to acknowledge the gaping wound in my soul. Her condolences, delivered at the graveside, had felt perfunctory, a box to be checked. Instead, her gaze, sharp and assessing, swept across the familiar landscape of our living room. It lingered, not on the photographs of John, but on the antique grandfather clock he had lovingly restored, on the hand-knotted Persian rug, on the crystal lamps he had cherished, their light now seeming to glint with an almost malevolent sparkle in her gaze. And then with an almost predatory glint, her eyes settled on the unassuming mahogany deed box on the mantelpiece, where John had always kept our most important documents. My heart, already bruised and aching, throbbed with a sudden icy premonition that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a visit of sympathy, it was an inspection, a calculated survey of assets. The vase of roses clutched tightly in my hands felt less like a comfort and more like a fragile shield against her audacious intrusion. What right did she have to even think such a thing mere hours after I'd buried the man who had loved her son, the man who had welcomed her into our family? The sheer audacity, the cold, clinical detachment of it all was breathtaking, a slap in the face to my raw, pulsating grief. I could feel a familiar, indignant heat rising in my cheeks, a potent mixture of anger and disbelief that threatened to erupt. This was my home, my sanctuary, purchased and maintained with John's sweat in our shared dreams, and she was circling it like a vulture, already picking over the bones of my life. "Well, Martha, darling," she began, her voice devoid of any genuine warmth, saccharine sweet, yet edged with something sharp and unyielding. It was the tone she used when she wanted something, disguised as concern. "It certainly is spacious. So much upkeep, don't you think? More than enough for just one person, wouldn't you say?" Her words were like tiny, sharp needles pricking at the raw wound of my loss, designed to undermine my independence, to make me feel small and incapable. I straightened my spine, drawing on an inner reserve of strength I hadn't known I possessed, a silent defiance against her insidious insinuations. "I've managed this house for 40 years, Cynthia. I think I'll be just fine," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning within me. A tremor of surprise, fleeting, yet palpable, crossed her face. She hadn't expected resistance. But she quickly recovered, her smile returning, thin and patronizing. "Of course, dear, you've always been so capable, but practicality dictates otherwise, doesn't it? Michael and I have been discussing things, especially now. He agrees it's simply too much for you here alone. All the upkeep, the taxes, the burdens of home ownership. It's really quite a burden, isn't it?" She peered at the pie I had intended to bake later, not with admiration, but with an almost dismissive air, as if my simple act of domesticity were a silly, outdated indulgence. The nerve of her, implying I was incapable of managing my own home, a place I had poured my heart and soul into for decades. My jaw tightened, a muscle clenching beneath my skin. "My poor Michael will need a place, now that he's taken on so much responsibility. And with our growing family, we'll need something more substantial. My son Michael, always so easily swayed by Cynthia, rarely standing up to her, was conspicuously absent. He hadn't even bothered to accompany her, a fact that gnawed at me, a bitter reminder of the distance that had grown between us since his marriage. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She was here for the house, John's coffin barely cold in the ground. The audacity of it all, the sheer unadulterated gall twisted a knot in my stomach, slowly tightening. What kind of monster plans to evict a widow grieving before the eulogies have even faded from memory? "We'll need to discuss the arrangements," she pressed on, stepping further into the room, her eyes still scanning, evaluating, as if already mentally rearranging the furniture to suit her taste. "Property transfer, legalities, it can all be so complicated, darling. But don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Michael and I will handle everything. It's for your own good, you understand? A fresh start, less stress." She reached towards the deed box on the mantelpiece, her fingers hovering, a silent, possessive claim. My blood ran cold, a glacial stream through my veins. This wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. A cold, hard fact hit me with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't asking, she was telling. And in that precise moment, a grim, determined resolve began to set in, slowly, surely, chilling the grief that had consumed me just moments before. A spark, small but fiercely defiant, ignited in the desolate landscape of my soul. "Oh, Cynthia, you have no idea what you're stepping into. You might think you hold all the cards, but the game has barely begun, and I'm about to show you that a grieving widow is not a helpless one." To be continued. The story has just begun, and believe me, it's about to get a lot more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when our protagonist faces even greater injustice. The days that followed John's funeral blurred into a painful, suffocating haze, each one a stark, cruel reminder of his absence. The house, once filled with the warmth of his presence, now echoed with a profound, aching silence that amplified my sorrow. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, mechanically performing tasks, trying to find some semblance of routine, some small anchor in the turbulent sea of my grief. Cynthia, however, seemed to thrive in my distress, her visits becoming a relentless onslaught, each one more frequent than the last, her intentions less veiled and increasingly brazen. She was no longer subtly hinting, she was openly campaigning for my eviction, circling me with the predatory patience of a shark. One crisp morning, the air outside sharp and invigorating, she arrived uninvited, her presence jarring the quiet solitude I so desperately craved. She carried a stack of pristine, legal-looking folders, their stiff edges almost aggressively sharp. I was in the kitchen, trying to find some semblance of order in the chaos of my emotions by baking John's favorite apple pie. The scent of cinnamon, warm apples, and a hint of nutmeg usually brought a profound sense of comfort, a bittersweet connection to shared memories. Today, however, it felt like a cruel irony, a domestic act performed amidst an unfolding domestic war. My hands, usually steady and capable after decades of baking, trembled slightly as I meticulously crimped the golden crust, the fragile pastry a metaphor for my own precarious existence. This pie, a small act of devotion, was a way to reclaim a piece of my life, a defiant statement against the forces that sought to crumble my world. "Martha, darling," she cooed, her voice sickly sweet, a sugary coating over a bitter pill, as she walked in without bothering to knock, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. She deposited the heavy, ominous folders onto my polished kitchen island with a decisive thud, right next to my rolling pin and a dusting of flour. The sound was jarring, a stark intrusion on my quiet efforts. "I've been speaking with Michael," she announced, her tone laced with a self-important finality. "He agrees it's simply too much for you here alone. A house this size, all the upkeep, it's really quite a burden, isn't it? Especially now." She peered at my pie, not with genuine admiration for the effort, but with an almost dismissive air, as if it were a quaint, silly indulgence for someone who should be focused on more practical matters. The sheer nerve of her, implying I was incapable of managing my own home, a place where every nail had been hammered with love, every floorboard polished with care. My jaw tightened, a familiar knot of indignation coiling in my stomach. "I've managed this house for 40 years, Cynthia. I think I'll be just fine," I stated, my voice firm despite the tremor that ran through me, a silent surge of defiance against her condescension. She simply smiled, a thin, patronizing curve of her perfectly painted lips, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear, you've always been so wonderfully independent, but practicality dictates otherwise, doesn't it? We've looked into some truly lovely assisted living facilities for you. Very modern, wonderful social activities, and no more worries about leaky faucets or, well, stairs." She gestured vaguely towards the grand oak staircase in the hall, her hand a dismissive flick, as if I were already a decrepit, shuffling invalid incapable of navigating my own home. My blood boiled. A slow, simmering rage began to spread through my veins. Assisted living? Was she insane? I was 62, perfectly capable, vibrant even, and certainly not ready for a nursing home. The indignity of it, the sheer disrespect, hit me like a physical blow, a cold, calculated insult thrown in the face of my dignity. This wasn't concern. This was thinly veiled ambition. She was trying to box me in, to strip away my autonomy piece by piece. Then came the piece de resistance, the main act of her cruel performance. "And as for the house itself," she continued, flipping open one of the folders with an officious, almost theatrical flourish, revealing what looked like a detailed real estate appraisal. "Michael and I think it's best if we just take it off your hands, darling, really. We've even consulted with a realtor. They say it's quite a hot market right now, good timing for a quick sale. Think of the freedom, Martha, no more responsibilities." Her words, delivered with the casual air of someone discussing the weather, not orchestrating a widow's eviction, were like a knife twisting in the wound of my loss. My pie, usually a source of profound comfort, now felt heavy and cold in my hands, its sweet aroma turning bitter. The audacity was truly breathtaking, a brazen act of opportunism that made my head spin. "A quick sale?" I repeated,
my voice barely a whisper, though it felt like a scream inside my head, a raw cry of outrage. My home? John's home? Our home? She merely shrugged, a dismissive flick of her perfectly manicured hand, as if I were clinging to some sentimental trifle. It's for the best, Martha, truly. Think of it as a fresh start, a new chapter. And really, with our plans for expansion, we do need a larger space. This one is simply ideal for us, you see. Plenty of room for the baby, and then some. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, lingering on the spacious pantry, the breakfast nook, the large windows, clearly imagining her own vibrant, bustling family occupying every inch of our life's work. My hands clenched around the pie dish, my knuckles white, the porcelain feeling brittle beneath my grip. The scent of cinnamon, once comforting, now felt like a suffocating shroud, a funeral pall over my cherished memories. She wasn't just taking my home, she was systematically erasing John's memory, paving over our life together with her self-serving ambition, reducing decades of love and shared history to a mere real estate transaction. The knot of dread in my stomach tightened, but beneath it, a seed of furious resolve began to sprout, firm and unyielding. This is only the beginning. Every twist and turn leads to a jaw-dropping revelation. You absolutely cannot miss what happens next when our heroine uncovers the truth.
Cynthia's relentless campaign to oust me from my own home intensified with each passing day, escalating from thinly veiled hints to an almost aggressive, overt assault on my peace. It was as if a switch had flipped in her, transforming her from merely calculating to overtly hostile, her eyes gleaming with an unnerving, almost manic ambition. The thin veneer of civility she'd once maintained had completely vanished, revealing a ruthless determination that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to find refuge in the small, familiar rituals of my day, clinging to them like a lifeline in the stormy waters she stirred around me. One crisp, clear afternoon, the kind of day that John would have loved for gardening, she arrived with Michael in tow. My son, the boy I had raised with so much love and hope, now looked like a lost puppy, his shoulders slumped, his gaze avoiding mine, utterly and tragically under his wife's thumb. I was in the sunroom, a favorite spot where John and I had spent countless hours, tending to my orchids, a hobby we had shared for decades. The vibrant blooms, exotic and resilient, were a testament to life's persistence, a stark, painful contrast to the deathly pallor that had settled over my own existence since John's passing. I meticulously misted their delicate petals, a small act of self-preservation, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, some small corner of my world where her insidious influence couldn't reach, where John's memory felt truly safe. "Mom," Michael began, his voice hesitant, a mere whisper of his usual confident tone, betraying his deep discomfort and reluctance. He couldn't even look me in the eye, focusing instead on a spot just over my shoulder, a clear, heartbreaking sign of Cynthia's pervasive manipulation and his own agonizing cowardice. "Cynthia and I, we've talked it over, and, well, we've come to a decision. It's just not practical for you to stay here. The property taxes, the maintenance, the sheer burden of a house this size. It's a lot for one person, you know, especially now with Dad gone." He fidgeted with his hands, a habit he'd picked up from his father when he was nervous, but in Michael it looked less like anxiety and more like evasion. It made my heart ache to see him so utterly controlled, so detached from the strong, independent man I'd raised, so willing to abandon his own mother at her most vulnerable. Cynthia, meanwhile, stood beside him, a triumphant, almost predatory smirk playing on her perfectly painted lips, as if she were directing a meticulously planned puppet show, pulling Michael's strings with invisible threads. Cynthia, seizing the moment, cut in, her voice sharp and uncompromising, slicing through Michael's weak protests like a razor. And frankly, Martha, it's a drain on our resources, too. Michael spends so much time here helping you, running errands, when he should be focusing on our future, on our growing family. It's simply unsustainable. The sheer gall of her, implying that my son's occasional begrudging help, which mostly consisted of her sending him to retrieve items from the attic or perform minor tasks she deemed beneath her, was a burden on their life. He rarely lifted a finger unless she prompted him, and even then it felt like an obligation rather than an act of love. My indignation simmered, a quiet volcano preparing to erupt. "We've found a lovely place, Martha," she chirped, her voice falsely bright, like a saleswoman pushing a product. "Sunset Meadows. They have a wonderful social calendar, excellent medical staff, and it's quite affordable considering all the amenities. You'll be surrounded by people your own age, Martha, people who understand what you're going through, and no more worries about leaky faucets or, well, stairs." She gestured vaguely towards the grand, sweeping oak staircase in the hall, her hand a dismissive flick, as if I were already a decrepit, shuffling invalid, incapable of navigating my own home. My blood ran cold, a glacial stream through my veins. Sunset Meadows? That was practically a glorified nursing home, miles away from my friends, my church, my garden club, my entire life, my memories. The indignity of it, the sheer disrespect, hit me like a physical blow, a cold, calculated insult thrown directly into the face of my dignity and autonomy. This wasn't concern for my well-being. This was thinly veiled ambition, a calculated attempt to box me in, to strip away my independence piece by piece. Then, with an air of absolute finality, she pulled out a stack of crisp, intimidating documents from her folder, thrusting them across the polished surface of the table toward me. "These are papers for a power of attorney, Martha. Just a formality, really, so we can manage your affairs without any fuss. It'll make things so much easier for everyone. Believe me. Streamline everything for your comfort." My eyes scanned the dense legalese, my mind reeling, a frantic current swirling through the fog of my grief. Power of attorney? This was far beyond managing affairs. This was about seizing absolute control of my entire life, my assets, my financial destiny, everything I had worked for alongside John. This was the ultimate usurpation. I pushed the papers back across the table, my hand firm, my resolve solidifying like concrete. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I stated, my voice unwavering, though I could feel a tremor in my hands. My refusal seemed to genuinely surprise her, wiping the smug, triumphant look from her face for a fleeting moment, replacing it with a flicker of something akin to disbelief, then irritation. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting from his wife's rigid face to my own determined one, avoiding eye contact with either of us. His silence was deafening, a betrayal more painful than any shouted accusation. It was then, as Cynthia's carefully constructed facade momentarily cracked, her perfect composure slipping just an inch, that a tiny, almost imperceptible detail caught my eye. A loose, dark thread, strangely out of place, clinging to the sleeve of her expensive, pristine blouse, a fabric that looked far too luxurious for mere daily wear. It seemed utterly insignificant in the grand scheme of the unfolding drama, a triviality amidst the threats and power plays. But it sparked a flicker of memory, a distant echo from years ago, a connection to something I'd buried deep away, something John had once mentioned in a hushed tone. The cold dread that had gripped me began to transform into something else entirely. A simmering anger, yes, but also a growing, potent sense of power. They thought they had me cornered,
a grieving widow ripe for the picking, but they had no idea what I knew, what I remembered. The game, I realized with chilling clarity, had just changed, and I, Martha, was about to play my hand. To be continued. The tension is mounting, and our heroine is on the verge of a breakthrough. You absolutely cannot afford to miss the climax of this story.
Cynthia, undeterred by my unwavering refusal to sign over my life, escalated her tactics with a venomous zeal that was frankly astonishing. She began showing up daily, often dragging Michael along, my son reduced to a mere prop in her ruthless play, who would parrot her increasingly absurd and insulting demands with the conviction of a ventriloquist dummy. His eyes, once so full of independent thought, now held a glazed, distant look that chilled me more than any of Cynthia's overt aggression. He was a shadow of his former self, a painful testament to the suffocating grip his wife had on him. My quiet resolve hardened into something unyielding, a steel core within my grieving heart. I would not let them break me. One sweltering afternoon, the kind of oppressive summer heat that made the air itself feel thick and heavy, while I was trying to find comfort in John's old, worn armchair, attempting to lose myself in the familiar verses of his favorite poetry book, they burst in without warning. The sudden intrusion shattered the fragile peace of the room, the already oppressive air suddenly crackling with their aggressive, almost frantic energy. Cynthia's face was flushed, her usual composure ruffled, indicating a growing desperation that I found both alarming and, I admit, somewhat satisfying. I clutched the worn, leather-bound book tighter, its familiar weight a small, tangible shield against their unwelcome presence. I refused to let them steal this last bastion of my peace, this small, private connection to my beloved John. Mom, seriously, Michael started, his voice strained, a raw edge of desperation that spoke volumes of Cynthia's relentless pressure. He still couldn't meet my gaze, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. We just want what's best for you. This house, it's too much. The upkeep alone is astronomical, and the market is booming right now. It's the perfect time to sell, for your benefit. He gestured vaguely around the spacious, well-appointed living room, as if it were a dilapidated shack rather than a meticulously maintained home filled with decades of love and careful preservation. Cynthia nodded in vigorous agreement, her eyes gleaming with a disturbing hunger, a predatory glint that chilled me to the bone. And frankly, Martha, she chimed in, her voice sharper now, stripped of its saccharine pretense, it's a drain on our resources, too. Michael spends so much time here, helping you, running errands, coordinating things, when he should be focusing on our future, on our growing family. It's simply unsustainable for us to continue this way. We have our own lives to build. The sheer gall of her, implying that my son's occasional, begrudging, forced help, which consisted mostly of her sending him to retrieve items from the attic or perform minor tasks she deemed beneath her, was a burden on their life. He rarely lifted a finger unless she prompted him, and even then, it felt like a resentful obligation rather than an act of filial love. My indignation simmered, a quiet volcano preparing to erupt. Then Cynthia, with an air of theatrical triumph, dropped what she clearly considered her ultimate bombshell. We've had the house appraised, Martha. A completely independent appraisal, of course. The market is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We could get a truly excellent price. Enough to set you up comfortably, Martha, truly. And frankly, more than enough for Michael and I to finally get the larger space we desperately need for our growing family with the baby on the way and all. She slid a glossy brochure across the gleaming surface of the coffee table towards me, its slick pages reflecting the harsh afternoon light. It was for a small, sterile apartment complex on the other side of town, far from anything familiar, far from my friends, my church, my beloved garden club. The photos in the brochure depicted tiny, soulless rooms in generic community spaces that look more like hospital waiting areas. It's a lovely senior community, Martha, she chirped, her voice falsely bright.
an unsettling contrast to the cold calculation in her eyes, with plenty of quiet activities, Martha. Bridge clubs, knitting circles, very peaceful. Quiet activities? My life, though currently shadowed by grief, was anything but quiet. It was rich with memories, with friendships, with the vibrant history that this sterile brochure sought to erase. The indignity of it, the sheer disrespect, hit me like a physical blow, a calculated insult aimed directly at my very existence. "My home is not for sale," I stated, my voice unwavering, though my heart pounded like a drum against my ribs, a rebellious beat in the face of their tyranny. My refusal seemed genuinely surprise her, wiping the smug, triumphant look from her face for a fleeting moment, replacing it with a scowl that distorted her features into something ugly and venomous. Michael, sensing a dangerous shift in the air, looked nervously from Cynthia's rigid, infuriated face to my own determined one, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He still remained silent, a painful testament to his complete subjugation. "Don't be difficult, Martha," she hissed, her voice now losing all pretense of sweetness, a viper's rasp. "This is for your own good. We've even spoken to a lawyer. You really don't have much choice in the matter. It's just a matter of time before we get a court order if you refuse to cooperate. It'll be much easier if you just sign." The threat hung in the air, cold and menacing, a palpable weight pressing down on me. My son, meanwhile, just stood there, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant, completely silent, utterly useless. It was infuriating, the way he let her dictate everything, even the brutal fate of his own mother, reducing me to a disposable obstacle in their path to wealth. My rage, once a simmering heat, began to boil over. But as she spoke of lawyers and choices, of court orders and selling my home, my mind, sharp and clear despite the pressure, raced back to that tiny, almost imperceptible loose thread on the sleeve of her expensive blouse that I had noticed during her previous visit. And then it clicked. A memory, long suppressed, buried under layers of grief and the everyday distractions of life, surfaced with startling clarity. It wasn't about the thread itself, but what it represented. A specific type of fabric, a unique texture I hadn't seen in years, connected to a hushed conversation I'd inadvertently overheard John having years ago. It was a slip of the tongue he had made, a fragment of information about a financial entanglement, a secret he'd kept to protect someone, a burden he'd carried alone. Cynthia's carefully constructed image, her air of impeccable superiority, suddenly seemed flimsy, almost transparent, a facade waiting to crumble. The cold dread that had gripped me, threatening to consume me, began to transform into something entirely different. Anger, yes, but also a growing, potent sense of power, a thrilling surge of adrenaline. They thought they had me cornered, a grieving widow ripe for the picking, easily dismissed and manipulated. But they didn't know what I knew, what I remembered. The game, I realized with chilling, exhilarating clarity, had just changed irrevocably. And I, Martha, was about to play my hand, a hand they never knew I held. This is the turning point. Everything you thought you knew is about to be shattered. You simply can't afford to miss the explosive climax of this story and how our heroine turns the tables.
The revelation of Cynthia's secret, a long-forgotten snippet of a conversation, now illuminated by the harsh light of her brazen greed, ignited a fierce, unyielding determination within me. The raw, debilitating grief for John was still a profound ache, a constant phantom limb of sorrow, but now it was overshadowed by a cold, calculated resolve that surprised even myself. I couldn't let her get away with this, not just for myself, for the dignity of my remaining years, but more importantly, for John's memory, for the legacy of honesty and hard work he had meticulously built. He would have been devastated to know how his generosity had been twisted, how his kindness had been exploited. I adopted a cunning strategy, one I hadn't known I possessed. I pretended to consider their generous offer for the apartment, playing the role of the confused, overwhelmed, grieving widow to perfection. I sighed dramatically, spoke of my weariness, and even shed a few calculated tears when Cynthia pressed me on the details of the supposed senior community. Cynthia, predictably, devoured every morsel of my performance, her smugness growing with each feigned sigh of resignation from my end. Her eyes, usually so sharp and suspicious, now gleamed with an almost palpable sense of triumph, completely blinded by her own arrogance. This charade, this elaborate act of surrender, gave me the precious time I desperately needed to gather my thoughts, formulate a meticulous plan, and most importantly, gather my arsenal. My first, most crucial step was to discreetly access John's old study, a room that had remained untouched since his passing, a solemn shrine to his intellectual life. It was a treasure trove of documents, but more than that, it was filled with his meticulous order, a reflection of his precise mind. Among his painstakingly organized papers, filed away with an almost obsessive neatness, I found what I was truly looking for: a series of old financial statements, bank records, and investment portfolios dating back several years. As I sifted through them, my heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and grim satisfaction, a pattern began to emerge, subtle at first, then glaringly, damningly obvious. Discrepancies, small, seemingly innocuous withdrawals from accounts he rarely touched, unusual transfers to unfamiliar entities, all dating back to a specific period several years ago. This coincided precisely with whispers of significant financial troubles that Cynthia and Michael had faced, rumors that had filtered through the family grapevine, dismissed at the time as mere gossip. This wasn't just a hunch. This was tangible, irrefutable evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to her deceit. I spent countless hours, often late into the night, hunched over John's old desk, poring over the numbers, cross-referencing dates, piecing together the agonizing puzzle of her betrayal. My once simple days of gardening and bridge had been replaced by a rigorous schedule of amateur forensic accounting. I discreetly contacted old friends of John's, former colleagues from his banking days, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I probed subtly, framing my questions as curiosity about John's old business dealings or just remembering old times, seeking any fragment of information that might shed light on Cynthia's past financial dealings, her sudden acquisition of expensive tastes, or any unusual behavior she might have exhibited around that time. It was like sifting through vast amounts of sand to find tiny specks of gold, but I was relentless, fueled by a fierce sense of justice for John. Each hesitant conversation, each unearthed tidbit, each confirmed suspicion strengthened my resolve, transforming my initial doubt into unwavering certainty. Cynthia had always been a master of appearances, a chameleon of charm and sophistication, but underneath the polished veneer, I now knew something far less savory lurked, and with every passing hour, I grew closer to finding out precisely what, and more importantly, how to expose it. One afternoon, the pretense finally reached its breaking point. Cynthia arrived brimming with an almost unbearable confidence, radiating smug self-satisfaction. She carried a pristine, gleaming for sale sign, fresh from the realtor's office that she fully intended to plant directly in my front yard, a blatant declaration of ownership. Just making things official, Marta. No sense in delaying the inevitable, is there? The market is hot, and we've already got interested buyers. Think of it. No more worries about this old place.
She even brought a small decorative shovel, its polished handle reflecting the sunlight, a symbol of her intent to literally dig me out of my home. The sheer audacity was truly staggering, a final public affront to my ownership and my grief. Michael surprisingly looked a little uncomfortable, fidgeting by the front door, unable to meet my eyes, a shadow of unease flickering across his face. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the moment I had meticulously prepared for. I slowly stood up from the armchair, the worn poetry book still resting on the table beside me, now replaced by a carefully arranged folder of documents, its contents waiting, silent and deadly. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, but my voice, when I spoke, was steady, remarkably calm, betraying none of the turmoil churning within me. "Before you do that, Cynthia, perhaps we should have a little chat about inevitability." Her smug expression, previously so impenetrable, finally faltered, a flicker of genuine suspicion, then a hint of fear entering her eyes. Michael, sensing a seismic shift in the air, a dangerous turning point, looked nervously from Cynthia's now pale face to my resolute one, a profound unease settling on his faces. I wasn't the meek, grieving widow they thought they were dealing with, easily manipulated and dismissed. I was a woman who had faced the deepest loss, but in doing so had found a strength I never knew I possessed, a fierce protectiveness over John's memory and my own future, and I was ready to use every ounce of it. The stage was set, the players in place. The curtain was about to rise on their undoing. The game is changing. Our heroine is armed with knowledge, and the confrontation is about to explode. You absolutely cannot miss the earth-shattering revelations in the next part of this story.
Cynthia watched me, her eyes narrowing into suspicious slits, a flicker of genuine apprehension finally breaking through the brittle shell of her brazen confidence. The air in the room, previously thick with her arrogant pronouncements, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, crackling like static electricity. Michael, still hovering awkwardly by the door, seemed to sense the seismic shift in the atmosphere, his unease morphing into outright alarm. His gaze flickered between Cynthia's tightening face and my own, now resolute and unwavering. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he mumbled, his voice a strained, uncertain whisper, but his tone lacked any conviction, tinged with a nascent fear that he couldn't yet articulate. "I'm talking about your secret, Cynthia," I stated, my voice cutting through the thick tension like a sharpened blade, each word precise, deliberate, and imbued with the weight of unearthed truth. I slowly, deliberately opened the folder I held, pulling out a crisp printout of bank statements, their columns of numbers stark and damning. I held them up, the clearly highlighted sections glaringly obvious even from a distance, undeniable proof of her deceit. "Remember that loan you and Michael supposedly took out right before your wedding? The one you said helped you start your new life together? The one that mysteriously disappeared from your accounts shortly after?" I paused, letting the damning silence hang heavy in the air, allowing the implication to sink in, to fester in their minds. Michael's eyes widened, a dawning horror creeping into his expression. "It didn't disappear, did it, Cynthia? Because it was never really there. Not in the way you presented it to my unsuspecting husband." Cynthia's face, usually so composed, paled dramatically. Her thin, carefully constructed smile contorted into a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated shock, then a desperate, snarling rage. "What are you talking about, Martha? That's ridiculous. You're just a bitter old woman making things up." She lunged forward, a sudden desperate movement, trying to snatch the incriminating papers from my hand, her fingers grasping uselessly in the air. But I held them firmly, my grip surprisingly strong, fueled by years of suppressed indignation and a lifetime of John's unwavering trust. "Oh, but it's not ridiculous at all, dear Cynthia, because I have the records. Records that show a significant sum, an exact match to the amount of your supposed loan, transferred directly from John's private account, the one that he rarely touched, the one meant for our retirement, to a shell company in the Cayman Islands.
then funneled into an account in Michael's name just weeks before your wedding." I looked directly at Michael, who gasped, a raw, choked sound escaping his throat. His face now utterly ashen, his body trembling. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost of his former self. "He didn't know, did he, Cynthia? He thought it was a legitimate, generous gift from his father, a loan you had arranged through some obscure family connection. He thought you were helping him, but it was money embezzled from John, stolen right under his nose from his own father. He trusted you, Cynthia. We both did, blindly, and you repaid that trust with deceit and theft." The room spun, filled with the palpable weight of shattered illusions. Cynthia, caught in the inescapable net of her own lies, was sputtering, trying to form coherent words, desperate explanations, but none came out. Her carefully crafted facade, her years of deceit, had finally crumbled into dust. That's a lie. You can't prove anything. You're just crazy." Her voice was shrill, unraveling, but the conviction was gone, replaced with pure, unadulterated panic. Michael finally found his voice, a raw, strangled sound that tore at my heart, a sound of profound betrayal and agony. He stared at Cynthia, his eyes, once so distant and complacent, now blazing with a mixture of disbelief, pain, and a terrifying cold fury. "Cynthia, is this true? Is this why you always push me so hard to manage Mom's finances after he died? Was this all part of it? Was I just a pawn in your game?" His words were laced with the venomous realization, the dawning horror of how deeply he had been manipulated, how completely his own father had been wronged, and how he, his son, had unknowingly facilitated it. He lurched forward, no longer a puppet, but a man consumed by righteous anger. Cynthia, seeing her meticulously constructed world crumbling around her, knowing she was utterly exposed, finally cracked. She lunged at me again, not for the papers this time, but with a desperate animalistic cry, her hands clawing, aiming for my face. But Michael, in a stunning, almost reflexive display of newfound courage and furious disgust, stepped swiftly between us, grabbing her arms, restraining her. "Stop it, Cynthia! What have you done? What else have you hidden from me?" His grip was firm, unwavering, a stark contrast to his earlier passivity. The facade of the dutiful, loving daughter-in-law had shattered completely, revealing the calculating, avaricious opportunist beneath, devoid of any genuine empathy or remorse. It became agonizingly clear to Michael with devastating clarity that his wife had systematically and cruelly deceived both him and his father, exploiting their trust, their love, and their generosity for her own callous financial gain. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him reeling in shock, profound disappointment, and a crushing sense of personal failure. The true climax wasn't a shouting match. Though voices were raised, it was a devastating, deafening silence that descended upon the room after Cynthia's desperate struggle ceased. The truth, revealed in cold, hard facts and undeniable evidence, hung in the air, heavier than any spoken accusation, a suffocating shroud of betrayal. Cynthia, seeing the utter condemnation in Michael's now clear eyes, knowing she was irrevocably exposed, that there was no way out, simply snatched her designer bag from the floor and fled, scrambling out the front door without another word, leaving behind the gleaming for sale sign lying uselessly on my polished living room floor, a symbol of her failed conquest. After she was gone, a profound, almost sacred silence descended upon the house, broken only by Michael's ragged, heartbroken breathing and the distant chirp of a bird outside. He stood there, shoulders slumped, utterly broken, staring at the empty doorway where Cynthia had just vanished. "Mom," he finally choked out, his voice raw with emotion, tears welling in his eyes and streaming down his face, genuine tears of sorrow and shame. I had no idea. I swear I had no idea. I am so sorry for everything." I looked at my son, truly looked at him for what felt like years. The man I had raised, now stripped bare of his wife's corrupting influence, stood before me, vulnerable, ashamed, but finally, truly present. It was a painful moment, laden with years of unspoken resentments and disappointments, but also one of profound truth and possibility. My victory wasn't just about reclaiming my home, about securing my financial future. It was about reclaiming my son, about bringing him back from the shadow of her manipulation. The house, now truly filled with John's cherished memory, felt like a sanctuary again, cleansed of Cynthia's greedy, toxic shadow. I had faced the deepest betrayal imaginable, but in doing so, I had not only found a strength I never knew I possessed, but had also perhaps found a path to healing for my fractured family, a new beginning from the ashes of loss. The final chapter has unfolded, but the impact of this story will last a lifetime. Thank you for staying with me through every twist and turn. Remember to subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience and justice.